fantastic job.
Thank you. Thanks
Really
so
wonderful.
much. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask first, can you tell us about the title of the show, POISE? It's such a compelling word. And what does this idea have to do with some of the more central concerns of your practice?
It was a kind of a difficult word to find, something that embraces the theme of the pictures that they were selected for the show. But then I wanted something that reflects the idea of liminality that runs through the images that I have here. That sort of tension before the resolution, that feeling of suspension in time, the balancing act, which is common throughout the pictures. And perhaps a little bit on the personal reflection of experience of an immigrant in between places, in between cultures. So I thought POISE would be the right title for the show.
It's such a compelling word, of course, because it can function as a verb and a noun or an adjective. So you're poised, you're on the verge of something, of some transition, but it could also be a descriptor of, and so much of your work has that beautiful sense of balance that I think poise gestures to. So that's really perfect choice. And I know not all of your work are still lifes, but that still life is central to your practice, and all of these works in this show, of course, are still lifes. So can you tell us a little bit about what draws you to the still life genre, and maybe about some of the symbolism of the subject matter particularly?
I think I condense my ideas and also reflect on what's happening out there, and also channel my creativity with the still life. And I think still life actually has the power to do that, more to be the center stage of an idea, and then spaces, landscapes, or people could just be in and out without taking the central role. So that's why I put still life in the core of my image making. There's also a reason for me to start having a dialogue with my environment, because finding a still life, it means that I will have an engagement with my environment that otherwise I would not have. How to source anything that I get, how do I collect things. So instead of creating first a human relationship with somebody that I have interest with, I first find the object, and by the object I come to the human subjects and the environment. There's a way of deconstructing what normally other people do with long-term projects, and that's the way I generally see still life as the importance of it.
That's fascinating. Is there an example in the room that you would want to talk about, sort of the way that you found the objects, how the objects led to, a relationship with a person or more work? This is a question I'm springing out of just right now.
Actually, there are so many. I don't think there is anything in particular in this show that it was a person in this, but I have examples here that I created still life work first, and then I found the people that they were. So you can see, so out of the series of beachcombed items that they are there, that I made many still life out of them, there are people that I found that they were also very similar to the and they're also animals. There's so many residents of the same place that they also resembled the work that I first produced. So yes, in a way.
Yeah, and the way that you photograph both the still lives and your human subjects are very sculptural. And so there's a way that the figures become still lives and the still lives become sort of alive, which I find really compelling. It makes your work a really sort of beautifully cohesive verb. Thank you for sharing those. And actually, while we're looking at those, you just explained to me that those are black and white Cibachrome.
Yes.
And so these works here on the wall are silver gelatin print enlargements from black and white Cibachrome. Can you tell us a little bit about why this is such a special medium and how this particular film works, or not film? That's the fun part of it.
So there is a nerdy side into what I do, but then that nerdy side sometimes comes to support the artistic final result that I'm trying to get to. So I learned about this camera. It's a camera that is the size of a room, and there is a lens inside it, which you go and stand in, and it produces a one-to-one full-length picture of you without any distortion. This is in Berlin. It's called the Imago camera. It was built by a group of German engineers that they also were curious in art in the 70s. And they tried to capitalize on their invention, let's say, by commissioning Cibachrome in Switzerland to create a paper, this paper, that they could, people could walk into this booth, have their picture done, and come out of it. They managed to purchase the paper from them, but the paper requires a machine to be processed. It took me 4 years to figure out a way of processing it, and when you process it, it actually gives you a very contrasty, with no detail, black and white image. It's a cool thing, but it's nothing of great tonality or anything in particular of quality. So then, when I started pushing this paper and experimenting with this, I realized that once I figured out how to use it, it was so fragile, and I pushed it to the end of the spectrum of the chemistry on top of it, which the chemistry almost breaks. If you look at this, the chemistry almost has a lot of issues that is all comes to the edge of where it's going to be either underexposed or overexposed, and a lot of the issues with you see that all the dots that you see on them, all of these dots are where it's no longer holding the exposure. And that was the tension I was talking about with my project, with the POISE, of this feeling, the energy that I wanted to get out of my project somehow manifests itself in the print that I wanted to get to as well. So I use this method for the project as well, because it shows how the imperfections adds that tension that I wanted to get to. So I use that method for the work that most of it is here, except this one. It's so technical and it was so difficult that I had to have a certain distance to the subject to be able to have a right exposure. This was too big. I had to stand back. I couldn't expose it. So I had to use a normal negative for this.
It's amazing. And you can tell the difference if you look at them both closely, which I hope everyone will do after the talk, the difference in the tonality and the speckles in these ones, but also the sense of focus, the detail, the level of detail and focus. It's like,
yeah, when you don't have a negative, it's way sharper, way sharper.
Super cool. So also I know that you exclusively work with an 8x10 field camera and all analog processes. So can you tell us a little bit about why the field camera and why all analog?
First is from a technical side, is I'm very much interested in the space. The spaces that you see, you could call it the ghost space or the ether, I call it. You can see that you never see the very end of the backdrop where the film finishes. That sense of the space that this medium only produces. You cannot have a digital camera or any other camera that is smaller. So that volume, that is space where things happens for me. That's where this camera only produces it. Second is that it's such a flimsy, imperfect way of image making, which when you're trying to work with something which is so, again, fragile all the time, everything that you have very little amount of trial and error with the subjects that I deal with, and then you have 120 steps that takes that camera to be operated, I put myself in a sort of a meditative state of mind. And that is also very helpful because I am in tune with the equipment that I use, with the subject I use. So I can be in that zone. Mm-hmm. Another layer of it, probably again, analyzing myself, is being an Iranian, we value a lot of, you have to pay your dues. Things that is made with labor, with hand, with that sort of craftsmanship as a integral part of, so basically I probably don't want to cheat, so to
speak. There's a rigor to your process.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you mentioned too, when we were just chatting about these, the hand of the artist is visible in them. So sort of philosophically, what do you feel the analog process, the hand of the artist, that adds to the work to sort of convey the meaning of it?
If photography is about showing you a form of time, the time it takes it's to produce something, I think then is very much reflected in the final result. It also, when you do something analog, you're much more embracing imperfection. Mm-hmm. You're trying to actually damage control rather than anything else. Everything is about to go off. That's what you're trying against. And perhaps a form of I don't know what I'm trying to find the best word for it. It comes to me. Yeah. It comes to me. I think.
But you mentioned imperfection too. This isn't on the list of questions, but I also want to ask about many of the objects that you're photographing are, for lack of a better word, dingy or dead. Found on the beach. I'm presuming those fish are no longer living. The goose in the vase, and I find very compelling, but they strike me too as you could think of them as imperfect. So is there a particular kind of subject that you're drawn to, and what do you think it is about those that draws you to them?
I don't know, because I think I'm more of a scavenger. It's whatever I find, I try to make something out of it. Yeah. I don't try to be discriminate. I'm quite democratic with what I find. It's like a jazz musician. Yeah. At whatever I respond to what I find. And then I make something based on memories of other art pieces I've seen or the feelings I have. But I try to be not that selective about whether I reject something or not.
Fantastic. I think they're all quite beautiful, and personally I'm drawn to them because of their profound subject matter, nature, and I know it's not on view here, but you have a snake image, and you might know I'm a big fan, so I quite enjoyed that one.
That snake was in someone's freezer for 6 years.
Okay, now I can't help it.
A frozen boy. Yeah.
Why? Why was it in the freezer?
There are a couple of stories about it.
Okay.
One was he was so attached to the snake that when he died, couldn't get rid of it, so kept that. So that was one. The second was that he couldn't perhaps afford it to get it by how legally you have to dispose of it. So that was another explanation.
Yeah. I am also a reptile owner, so I.
Okay, you know that. You know that.
I don't have any reptiles in my freezer, but I understand the attachment to one. So.
My other half, came once from a trip from Australia, and there were 6 of them in our freezer.
Amazing. Okay, why?
Because I didn't have a freezer in my studio in that time.
Okay,
but I had discovered that there are actually more people that they keep their dead reptiles in their freezer. So I managed to collect them. So.
That's so fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So this is a fun segue into sort of another topic. I was really interested in your CV when Diane sent it because I was struck by you have a Bachelor of Science in International Business, Master of Science in International Strategy and Economics, and a PhD in Modern History, all of those from the University of St. Andrews. So how does this background inform your photography, if it does, and sort of how and why did you transition from academic research to image making? From snakes.
How long do you have? Short answer is that I wanted to be an artist, but grew up in a Iranian family. That's a big no-no. So you have to do the academic career. And until actually you sent that questionnaire to me, I had thought that probably there's nothing that they would overlap. Although there is, when you do any artistic work, you have to do a lot of research. And that research, but of course, it's helpful to have a PhD and done academic work because it's the same method that you use finding what you're looking for. However, when I started to think a little bit deeper into my own academic interest, realize that there is this interdisciplinary, and particularly I've always been interested in the concepts of hegemony in history, whereas why changes happen, why there is sort of in between war and peace, as Tolstoy put it, and that sort of poise, in a way, reflected in my academic career as well. So realize that maybe there is subconsciously been a relation between the two.
Yeah, I often think about so often people think about how human politics or economics they feel separate from artistic expression or from culture, but really those are all very intertwined. And if I remember correctly, your PhD project was about religion to a certain degree. And so for me, that's a sort of intersection place where it becomes very clear how society and culture, art and politics can all be sort of wrapped up. So it's really fascinating to.
I think art actually explains things much easier in many ways than when you're trying to do it in a sober way that the academia tries to, because it compartmentalizes everything into these segments that you want to have a very objective discussion about, but it cannot address the broader issue. Whereas art actually could be just go and touch and explain everything and not being responsible for being criticized for it.
Love that. I mean, art is both more expansive, it can encompass more, what I'm hearing you say. I also find it more a motive. And so I can approach an artwork and have a sort of intuitive understanding of something, even a giant sort of wide ranging topic of something, um, which is totally different from reading an academic paper where
Sure.
I feel confused and don't have any understanding at all. um, so also your academic research, a lot of it was centered around Iran, and I know that you grew up there. And so I'm also curious how that personal background of being from Iran, also being an immigrant to Scotland, you've already gestured towards this a little bit, thinking about that idea of poise, but is there anything else that you want to say about sort of how that personal background has influenced your work?
Um, it's I don't really know. That's one of those things I have to dig into to
Yeah.
really to see that if there is anything profound in this or not.
Mhm.
So far, I don't think there is anything too big. But I think in terms of the practice,
Mhm.
what I think it's always been art has been pigeonholed in is that if you're an immigrant, you do that sort of work, which is what is the connection either you have with the country that you left or with your community.
Mhm.
I didn't have any of these. So
Interesting.
I had to find a way to connect with the place I was in.
Yeah.
But then when Dan mentioned my fascination with the primitive art or the art from the ancient times, that was the way Iranian artists from the prehistoric time,
Yeah.
they were interacting with their environment by making objects that symbolized whatever they were trying to make sense of what was going on. So then I kind of used that, and photography was the only tool I knew how to use to create that sort of a. So there is a bit of that, but I don't know how to articulate it in a.
That seems very clear to me. You guys can ask follow-up questions, but also, for some of our audience members who might not have read this, you're all self-taught in terms of your photographic practice. So really, I like this idea of being drawn to interact with the world around you and sort of picture it in a very intuitive, but also very rigorous, obviously, because you've self-taught yourself some of the most, um, detailed analog processes. um, so that's a really beautiful thought of being so intuitive and rigorous in your process. Um, I know that we want to leave lots of time for questions, and also if they come to you, I have a couple more questions, but anytime you want to type up, that's okay. So I know also that you have worked both, you've been working independently with your own practice for many years now. You've also worked with Richard Leroyd, doing some scouting of locations for him. And so I'm wondering how that sort of relationship might have influenced your work, or what does it feel like to work with somebody rather than completely on your own?
I mean, Leroyd was a fantastic opportunity for me to find one of the heroes of myself alive. The most of the time, everybody that you like is gone. And also having the opportunity to become friends with a person that you also look up to, but then they admire what you do and encouraging you. So that's where the sort of starting point of it is. And also kind of getting the kudos from him that what I was doing is the way correct. And also having been able to have conversations. What I learned from Leroy, which probably has been the most interesting part about it is the decision-making process that he goes through. So observing him during the work that he was doing, how he decides of the process of elimination for him.
Interesting.
And how often he also had doubts in his work. So there was all these, and the mistakes that he also made. So that kind of a exposure to someone in that caliber was very, very important. And now I have someone that I also anchor to as well. So that's another sort of side to our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of art historically too, there's a relationship there. You know, when people are contextualizing your work for the history books, um, to be in conversation with Leroy's work as well will make for really interesting conversations down the line. I think your two styles are so complementary and simpatico that it's really beautiful. People.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that, or anything else that you would point to as a particular influence on your work, and in what ways?
So the first and foremost are the artifacts that you find in Iranian museums. Mm-hmm. Those are the early 2,500, 3,000, 5,000 years. Those are the ones that I probably would say the first one. But photographically speaking, is Irving Penn, of course, is one that I really was drawn into his work. Best compliment I once was received that somebody looked at one of my prints. Oh, is that Irving Penn? And so I was very, very happy. I wish I said yes.
Yes, I am me.
Mistakenly I didn't. Yeah, I've missed out on that opportunity. But then Joseph Cornell, I think, is also very. I think Joseph Cornell. I think part of the way that I look at work is people expect now to go to exotic places, to travel to exotic places, and making work is always there's that travel part is very instrumental. It's seldom about where you are in your locality, and Cornell managed to fool everyone. That's he never left more than 3 blocks away from his flat in wherever he was in New York. But everybody thought he traveled the globe, and that for me was the way of yes, okay, so you can do this and be creative with whatever you have without engaging with a community that you don't necessarily belong to or a place that is not that exotic or exciting. So he is a very
That's so interesting. I hadn't thought of that before, but the octopus and the fish speak to me of travel, perhaps, and even the flowers. Certain animals or plants we think of maybe being associated with different places, and I might have guessed that you had traveled all around. So amazing to hear how important the hyperlocal is for you. You've really given us so many worlds to go into through your work.
And I think that's where the people and places. So I can actually, one thing about the strength of doing still life is that I can put a place and a person that you can imagine this to be actually happen here in California. Or just, but that's the thing, you can create different narratives when you have that central point of the still life to tell the story with.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Are there any questions from the audience? I'm sure.
Only 6. Only 6.
Process windows. So tight.
Yeah.
They all look so uniform. I'm blown away.
There is almost a Zen-like thing in that the whole time. Yeah.
Did you originally want 8? Or?
There are 8. There are 8 of them. Yes.
I was joking. So often I take 36 pictures on our wall, and I like 1 or none, and then have you put 6 perfectly processed pictures.
But actually, as a matter, I brought something here that you can see that there is got a mistake in it. So I want to show that not every time is right. So that's and when I take 1 and the 1 is actually is a strong picture, but it's not perfect. But then I will live with the imperfections of it. I think that's where the analog beauty is. But you can see the imperfection very well. Um, the the truth is that these days is whatever I have because it's so scarce to get anything. So in terms of color transparency, these are Fuji stopped making them, so I have a box of 5 sheets left, and they're expiring. So I may find something that I say, okay, the color is fine for what I'm doing, so let's just, before this goes bad, so bad, because they already, all of them are expired, but just so bad, let's just make that picture today. And if I have, these are already, I can't really get these paper anymore. I have some super expired version that I've been experimenting with some success now. So then I work with whatever I have, and based on the outcome of this, I start making work that complements the print, and the print basically finally tells me whether the subject is correct or not. Well, I took about 4,000 of these to understand how to process it. When you work that, so it's a huge amount of money and investment and time is already gone into learning. By that time, you really know what you're doing. Still, you can make mistakes, but I am kind of very confident in almost what I do should come out by then, but it still may not. So safety shot, again, it's a matter of whether I have a spare negative with me or a paper or not. Most of the times, no.
Is there a new to you material that you're interested in diving into if these materials that you've been working with are so difficult to get?
So I've been, well, there's one is the very expired version of this, which is the ISO of it is 0.3. So that's the ISO. And what it happens with when you take pictures with it is that because the material is almost completely not sensitive, but it's supposed to produce positive for you, it produces negative to some degree, positive, solarized, also grain. I can show you some examples of it. It's almost everything that you have in analog photography happens in one picture. So that's one.
Very cool.
And then there is another form that I use with a direct paper. So it's one of these, I forgot what it's called, it's an American old school photo booth that you would go and take those. So I've managed to use that chemistry. So I buy the chemistry, which is funny enough, a company in Russia makes it.
Interesting.
And because of the war, they have difficulties. Every time I start something, a war happens or somebody goes out. But I've managed to actually use normal photographic paper to create, and that's completely produces completely a different look and everything.
Yeah, I can imagine, and it's rare to find those analog photo booths here in the U.S. these days too. But if you haven't been, Musée Mécanique still has one or two. Yeah.
I'll tell you the story behind this series is that I met this by complete chance of working in a very small area of near Edinburgh. We have a bridge. If anybody visited there, is the icon of Scotland. That bridge. So I was doing some sort of work in my head that's around that bridge. And I came across this person who was beachcombing, but she had some mental, well, I wouldn't, it's kind of a hoarder that had hoarded for 20 odd years beachcombed objects. So she had rooms like this filled in with everything that she could gather from the beach. So I started making the sculptures and making some sort of order with whatever it was there. And a lot of them became quite elaborate. I have one or two of them here to show you. And then at some point I started to simplify it. I said, how can I make everything simplified? And also try to say that was what I was hoping to achieve, the sort of, if things fall apart, they don't necessarily end up in disaster. Mm-hmm. Each one of these destructions could end up in something beautiful again. And you could think about it as destruction or a construction. Mm-hmm. So this was a way of looking at life, but also being so in tune with in all the materials that I have found out of it. And this was the sort of the best work in that.
It's amazing seeing just one small change from each frame to the next makes such a huge difference. But they're all so beautiful and so perfect.
Yeah, that is out of that 4,000 pictures, is that I said, going through it. It's finding that tonality of gray, which is basically for me was how would I feel that space. It was all about which tonality of gray will give me that idea of depth that would draw me into it. And a lot of huge amount of experimentation, and basically, ultimately, the way I did it was by increasing the temperature in my chemistry so beyond what I should have made it, and also underexposing the picture, and that destroys a little bit of the emulsion, but creates that gray tonality which you like. So it's a kind of a give and take in cooking, if you want to call it, to get that result.
Very cool.
Somebody brought it in for me to photograph, and it's interesting. The octopus one was in the freezer, and in the it's actually in a different studio. So not the snakes were made in my current studio, it's the previous studio. And funny because somebody who actually, funny enough, he lives in San Francisco, was supposed to come and I would take his picture. And I thought I'm going to do something with the octopus in him. And he gave up, he didn't show up. So it was kind of my frustration, my disappointment, everything I was feeling probably went to that octopus alone. Well, now that you're asking, the thing is that that bird, his head was shot completely. There was almost no head left. So that was, when the season is and they shoot in Scotland these things. That would happen. So the head was, I couldn't really, I thought everything else was pretty, but what do I do because the head is so poorly damaged? So this was a way of hiding. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying to you. I'm not discriminating against something which is,
Yeah. My question is, how did you start? I mean, you don't start by saying, hey, I'm going to get an 8x10 camera. I just wanted technical and sort of aesthetic beginning. What were your first steps when you said, hey, I'm going to become a photographer? What picture did you make?
I had a Minolta SRT 101. That was my dad bought it in Berkeley in the 60s. That was my first camera 25 years ago or so. But I didn't know anything. I was just basically taking pictures of like anything that was, to me, was quote unquote was pretty. Later on, when I became very interested in photography as an art form, I started to visit Paris Photo and places that the galleries, they exhibit the work, and looking at, I don't know if you've been to any of the big shows where there are thousands of super images there. And I started to get so confused. You go to the jungle, you don't see the trees anymore. Coming back is okay, I can't remember anything. The next year and the day after, and at some point, okay, I'm going to think about what I would remember. What are the 2 or 3 pictures that I remember out of this? And it turned out that all of those pictures were taken with big cameras. And I realized, okay, there must be something about this big camera that then when you get the big camera, you immediately regret your decision. Yeah.
But not enough that it stopped you.
No. I use my memories, so they could be my dream. But there is definitely a link to surrealism in my approach to making art as well. And the fact that there is that space that we're talking about, that's not a normal space that we normally view. But there is definitely always been an interest in surrealism in my work from very, very early on. And I'm glad that you noticed it.
Thank you.